Why should you keep trusting Jayden Reed and Jaylen Warren as awesome flex plays in Week 11? It's time to break down our flexes, our deep sleepers, and our price picks of the week as we close the week of Locked On Fantasy Football.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NFL fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast. As usual, I'm one of your co-hosts, Vinnie Iyer, and when I'm not doing this, I'm writing about NFL fantasy and betting for sportingnews.com.
Hey, I'm Michelle Magdziuk, researcher at NFL Network and fantasy analyst for NFL.com.
All right, Michelle, today's show we dedicate to some of our favorite flex plays. We make our picks there, as well as our deep sleepers, dark throws that you can take a shot on if you're hurting with bye weeks or injuries and just need a guy that could come through for you with the points needed. So we'll go through that. Of course, make our picks of the week there to play on PrizePicks. Speaking of PrizePicks, this episode is brought to you by PrizePicks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to PrizePicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use the code all lowercase LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. All right, Michelle, before we get into the flex plays, it was a real rough Thursday night game. We had avoided major injuries, but we get two in the same game. One completely killed the Bengals because Joe Burrow came up with a sprained right wrist. But unfortunately, if you're counting on Mark Andrews down the stretch, you're not going to have him. High ankle sprain. John Harbaugh was very quick to say he's out for the season. Look, he could return to the playoffs, but that's not going to help us in fantasy. So really tough here. And look, tight end was getting better, but still you lose two performers. And we'll see about Joe Burrow going forward. I mean, that did not look good, and we'll see if he can go in the next game.
Yeah, it's interesting. It came out a sprained wrist is the initial diagnosis. We'll see what happens today when they do more testings. I don't know. It seemed a little bit more serious than that to me. His hand was like ballooned up when they, had that shot of it close up. And he just couldn't throw it whatsoever. I mean, he couldn't grip the ball and he was in agony. I don't know. I've had sprained wrists before. I just don't think that's the reaction that a NFL football player would have with a sprained wrist, but maybe I guess I've never tried to throw a football with a sprained wrist, so I don't know, but definitely worrisome for the Bengals. They go down to 5-5. They have a lot of injuries. They lost their corner as well last night, their best corner, Cameron Britt. So it's not looking good for them right now.
Yeah, and Joe Burrow, this could be just one of those, chalk it up to the early injury to the ankle, now this wrist, just not the regular Joe Burrow you're going to get in fantasy. So that's just it. But Mark Andrews, again, one thing I'll say, don't look to the Ravens tight ends because they have a lot of receivers. It's a crowd there. It's not Isaiah Likely plug and play time going forward. So he was hardly used at all. So we'll see. We'll give you those waiver wire options to help you at tight end. I'm sure there'll be more guys who pop up. But first, Michelle, let's go through some non-tight ends you have as your favorite three flex plays of the week.
Yeah, two of my favorite flex plays this week are running backs. They're typically wide receivers, but I'm liking some of the running backs this week in their matchups. First up being Commanders, running back Brian Robinson Jr. He gets the Giants, and the Giants have been real bad against running backs as of late. Allowed 21 points to Breece Hall in week 8, 21 points to Josh Jacobs in week 9, and then Rico Dowdle, not Tony Pollard, had the 79 rushing yards and a touchdown and just 12 carries against them last week. So really love this for Brian Robinson. I think they're going to run a ton in this game because all they have to do is throw. I think they're really going to take advantage of facing Tommy DeVito and not having to throw as much and just trying to run the ball more with Robinson there. And then Jerome Ford, Browns running back, going up against the Steelers. The Browns have to start Dorian Thompson-Robinson this week. It's not going to be pretty, I don't think, in the passing game. So I do expect them to try to run the ball a lot. And the Steelers have given up a decent amount of rushing yards this season. And he's gotten a ton of carries over the last 2 weeks. Jerome Ford had 17 carries last week, 20 carries a week prior. So I do think they're going to give him a lot of touches. It just comes down to can he get the touchdown, or are they going to keep going to Kareem Hunt? But if he gets a touchdown, I think he has a super great game. And then even without the touchdown, I think he's a safe play. And then last up, it's a wide receiver, rookie wide receiver, Jayden Reed. We talked about him on yesterday's show. Packers going up against the Chargers. Chargers are allowing the 6th most fantasy points per game to wide receivers, but are getting destroyed from the slot this year. And that's exactly where Jayden Reed plays. He is the Packers' top slot wide receiver, and he's had 80 plus receiving yards in 2 of the last 3 weeks. I think he's getting more involved, and he's really can have those big chunk plays. So I like him to have a big week in this matchup.
Yeah, we talked about Jayden Reed a lot this week, and look, Jerome Ford has paid off, right? If you got him early on the waiver wire with Nick Chubb, nobody's really like dominated other than maybe if you Sam Howell. People have had a love-hate relationship with him on the waiver wire, but Jayden Reed could be that guy down the stretch. I think the Packers need to trust him a little bit more. So love the Ford and Robinson call. They can absolutely smash in those matchups this week. Now, Michelle, I've got a couple wide receivers in mind and one running back to look at. Now, number one is Jordan Addison. Now, you would say he was a guy we were playing regularly, but maybe not so much, right? Because you have the transition to Josh Dobbs. Addison didn't do much here the past couple games, but here's an opportunity now where potentially Justin Jefferson comes back, and I think that really helps Jordan Addison. That means he'll be the clear number 2, getting open with favorable coverage. If that's not the case, they'll find a way to get Addison open, and I think they need to rev up this combination between him and Dobbs. So I really like Jordan Addison this week. I like the fact that maybe they'll move him around a little bit as well if Jefferson's in there. So again, I really like him actually more if Jefferson plays. I still like him playing off TJ Hawkinson if Jefferson doesn't play. Now, when we look at Jaylen Warren, I mean, he's pretty much been the other side, Jerome Ford. He's now the ceremonial starter over Najee Harris, which means that they just consider them to be on the same plane, right? It just based on the matchup and situation. This matchup is great in terms of their offensive line is playing really well. And the Browns, the run defense showing a little bit of holes. And you look at that, Jaylen Warren is going to be a big part of what they do. So a lot of ground game here between the two committee backs, but I think Ford and Warren are the better plays this week, point-wise, than Najee Harris and Kareem Hunt. And then Chris Godwin, look, it hasn't been all that exciting if you look at his numbers. I think what's happened here is he's just not getting open the same way, right? They're not doing it here with the Tom Brady gone, right? He was a favorite of Tom Brady all over the field. Baker Mayfield, we know, favors Mike Evans and dump offs to Rashad White. But in this particular matchup, that's where you have to throw the 49ers. I think you look at inside, Ambry Thomas is usually there. That's where you want to target them. So I could see a massive high volume of shorter passes here for Chris Godwin as we expect the 49ers to pull away in this game.
Yeah, I mean, you always want to play slot wide receivers against the 49ers. It's Isaiah Oliver is their main slot corner that just is the absolute worst. I mean, he can't cover anybody to save his life. I will say, Trey Palmer, like if you're just dying for someone on waivers or looking for someone super cheap in DFS, Trey Palmer, Buccaneers receiver who's actually run the most routes out of the slot. I don't think he has a huge game in receiving yards, but I could see him have, 4 receptions, 40 yards and a touchdown. And, his cost is going to be super cheap. So definitely an option there. I agree with you. I think I like Addison better if Justin Jefferson is back so that the coverage just has to go Jefferson's way a little bit. And Jaylen Warren and Najee Harris are the only things working right now for the Steelers offense. So I get it's a hard matchup, but they have to keep riding that because it's the only thing that works. Their passing game is atrocious, and I don't expect the Kenny Pickett to find any success against the Browns secondary. So I do expect them to be able to run often. We'll see the success they'll have, but Jaylen Warren hopefully can get to the outside and get those chunk yards. It's the only hope that Pittsburgh has on offense. We're going to get into some of our deeper sleepers of the week. It's not Trey Palmer. I just gave you an extra one there, but we'll go through 3 guys each after we talk about our lovely sponsor, PrizePicks. Do you love playing daily fantasy? You should try out PrizePicks. PrizePicks is a skill-based, real money daily fantasy sports game. How does it work? You pick 2 to 6 players, and if they go more or less than their PrizePicks projection, you can win up to 25 times your money on any entry. At PrizePicks, you aren't competing against other people. It's just you versus the projections available instead of battling thousands of other players, including pros and sharks. PrizePicks adds a ton of excitement to the sports viewing experience. Players can choose from a vast selection of sports and stat types not offered anywhere else. And you can even make in-game wagers, which is a lot of fun as well. If a game is boring, just go in there and put some money down on more or less and enjoy the game even more. Vinny and I will go through our favorite PrizePicks of the week at the end of today's show. So if you want to place those picks with us, or you want to place other picks for this week's slate of games, all you have to do is go to prizepicks.com/lockedonnfl and use code LOCKEDONNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, that's prizepicks.com/lockedonnfl and use code Locked On NFL for a first deposit match up to $100. Daily fantasy sports made easy. All right, Vinny, let's get into our deeper sleepers here. Hopefully you don't have to play them, right? That's the goal. In your normal redraft leagues, you're not like dying to play these people, but they're options. If you really need someone to plug in, you think they can have a solid game, or if you're playing DFS and you're looking for some cheaper options out there, name your 3 guys that you're eyeing this week.
Yeah, I mean, I looked at the matchup a little bit for Michael Wilson, and look, Trey McBride has a great matchup. Now, the way that the Texans play, I mean, it's very similar to the 49ers defense, a little bit zone. And you look at Michael Wilson, he's getting about half in the slot with his chances here in this offense. So you look at Marquise Brown, I think it's a tough spot for him, just the way that if a defense can basically contain big plays, I think it's not good for Marquise Brown. And you look at the Texans, they've done a great job of that with their corners. Now, Wilson could see a little bit of Derek Stingley Jr., but when he's inside and you get an opportunity here against the Texans, I think you look at this kid being more involved, and he was just short of a touchdown last week. I mean, just short. That was the play that Clayton Tune had to come in and clean up the next play. So there's an opportunity there for him to have a bigger role. We've seen it go off here, right? We've seen the 2 touchdown game from him in the past with Josh Dobbs. So looking good here with Kyler Murray. I think he's going to be a bigger part of this offense with the youngster McBride. So maybe a youth movement around the quarterback. Now, speaking of Murray, this is an older player, but Latavius Murray. And here's why I think Latavius Murray is going to have a key role against the Jets. Now, James Cook was good last week, but he did have the fumble. He actually had 2 fumbles. One bounced in his hands and gave him the big run that made him fantasy relevant in the game. Now, is that a bit lucky? Probably. But the Jets struggle against kind of the power running game. And keep in mind, Latavius Murray fired up this team. He was the one who gave them a speech here to get them back on track after some of the latest things. They want to reward this guy. He played with passion. He was the only guy that really showed up, I think, in that Broncos game from wire to wire. So I do like Latavius Murray having a bigger role and being rewarded for that. And again, you can run on the Jets, and he's the style of runner who can do that. And this guy, he's kind of like my DeMario Douglas from a few weeks ago, just totally off the radar, but there's a lot of reports indicating that they like him in the lineup. He's been hurt here before. Kyle Phillips, I've always liked this kid out of UCLA, a very good slot receiver for the Titans. Titans are not getting the ball downfield. They're not. And they're not throwing to Chigakonkwo at tight end. The pass protection stinks. DeAndre Hopkins is in a tough spot this week against the Jaguars corners, but they're not very good in the slot, and that's where Kyle Phillips is. So, look, it's not a high upside play, but if you're looking for a cheap 6 for 60 on 8 targets and you're in a PPR league, you can do a lot worse than Kyle Phillips this week as your wide receiver 3. And full disclosure, I might have to play Michael Wilson and Kyle Phillips, and I just realized that's a Wilson-Phillips combination. So, yes, hold on for one more day with these 2 guys. Hopefully they'll come through for me and my team. So I'm backing them by actually playing them and needing to play them this week with the bye weeks.
With Latavius Murray, I'm so interested to see the backfield usage with Joe Brady now instead of Ken Dorsey. I want to see what they change up here. They're clearly mad at Ken Dorsey for some type of usage with players or some type of play calling because, I mean, They've been they've been a good offense besides the turnovers. And I don't really think you can put that on Ken Dorsey, right? That's on Josh Allen or James Cook last week. But I just want to see the usage between James Cook and Latavius Murray. Super interested in seeing that snap count with Joe Brady at offense coordinator. I do think one of these kids I call Latavius Murray. He's probably my age, but I do think he has a good game against the Jets. One of them will, either Cook or Murray. So I like that call. And Michael Wilson, I actually have a different Cardinals wide receiver in one of my 3 guys. I have Rondell Moore. So that's the one I'm leaning towards more. I do think the Texans, they're not like the best matchup when you look at, fantasy points allowed, but they are allowing over a 70 or 67% catch rate to wide receivers this year, 8th highest in the league. So it's not like they're dominant against wide receivers. And Rondell Moore is going to get a lot of those smaller, shorter targets. So they're going to be the easier catches. Can he break one off, right? The yards after the catch. But I do love to see he got 8 targets right away with Kyler Murray. So I don't think it's going to be a super high upside game, but if he gets into the end zone, he's going to give you a really nice week. And if he doesn't in PPR, he'll still give you a solid 10 to 12 points. So I think he's a viable play this week. And then 2 guys that I think have higher upside, Rashee Rice, rookie wide receiver for the Chiefs, going up against the Eagles. Eagles are giving up by far the most fantasy points per game and to wide receivers this season. Rice's snap percentage has increased each of the last 4 weeks, with his last game being the highest of his career at 68%. That's just great to see that it keeps increasing every single week. They keep getting more comfortable with him on the field. And then they just had their bye. And a lot of times that's where you see then rookies come out and get even more usage. They feel more comfortable in the offense because you had that week to kind of get more settled in and have time to implement other plays and things like that. So I just think this should be a really high scoring matchup, and Rashee Rice has a very high ceiling in this type of matchup. And then Ty Chandler, running back for the Vikings. It's yet to be seen if Madison will play or not, but I really think he's a viable option either way, right? Without Madison, he has a super high ceiling. With Madison, I still think he's a good play. He was getting a lot of snaps before Madison went out with injury. And the Broncos are allowing, again, like we talked about the Eagles giving up so many receiving yards to wide receivers. That's what the Broncos are doing to running backs on the ground. I mean, giving up so many yards for carries, so many fantasy points per game to running backs. And I know a lot of that had to do with the Dolphins game, but it's still happening, especially with the yards per carry, just chunk plays that running backs are able to get. So I really like Ty Chandler this week. I think he sees a ton of volume and he's able to get it done against this defense.
Yeah, these are good calls for sure. I mean, Rashee Rice, I think we might soon be seeing this guy as a guy that goes from do we want to play him based on the matchup to, oh, wait, he's the Chiefs' main wide receiver here. So this could transition here after the bye pretty quickly. And again, it's a very good matchup, we said. So Rashee Rice might even have some wide receiver 1 juice this week, Michelle. So we'll watch that. Yeah, we'll see if that comes through. But yeah, I do love him this week quite a bit. And when we're talking about these guys in the flex and deep sleepers, these are also some very good DFS values that you want to get in your lineup as well. So keep that in mind because there are a little bit of pivots from what maybe some people might have. So it's a good thing to consider here for their value as well. You do need to tell you here that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. So go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. Now it's time to hear from another one of our great sponsors. This episode of Locked On Fantasy Football is brought to you by DoorDash. Now, we love having DoorDash as our best friend on game day, Sunday, whether we need some stuff from the grocery store, chips, dip, drinks to get us through the day, or we just want to splurge on pizza and wings and have just kind of a traditional takeout type thing. They're going to take care of you and bring you what you need there during NFL Sundays and beyond whenever you need to pick me up and you don't have time to pick it up. So they're right there for you. DoorDash is really what you need every game day and just in general in life. When you're needing something badly and you just don't want to leave the house, they're going to deliver for you every time, literally. So it's easy to get in on DoorDash. You can now get in with 50% off up to a $10 value when you spend $15 or more on your first order when you download the DoorDash app and enter the promo code LOCK23. Again, that's LOCK23. That's 50% off up to $10 value when you spend $15 or more, again, on your first order when you download the DoorDash app and enter the promo code LOCK23. Subject to change. Terms do apply. All right, Michelle, time to get into our PrizePicks picks of the week to close the show. And look, I think I got you going on this, but I like when we pick some rushing yards for quarterbacks, and you have a really good one this week. So I'll let you go with your three. And our favorite Josh Dobbs is on your list, and not a surprise.
Yeah, I definitely took after your role here. You normally take the rushing yards for quarterbacks. I normally stay away from it, but this week I felt too good about this one. Josh Dobbs, more than 26.5 rushing yards. We just talked about how bad the Broncos run defense is the worst in the league. And Dobbs has 40 plus rush yards in 7 of the last 9 games, right? Including 4 of the last 5 games. The one game he didn't do it, it was 26 rushing yards, so 0.5 less than what he needed. But I mean, with the Vikings, 66 yards and 44 yards these last 2 games with them, right? He is pretty much the run game. He does lead the team in rushing yards since joining them and rushing touchdowns. But I think this is such a smash. I think he gets at least 40 yards in this game, and all he needs is 27. And then my other 2, DJ Moore, Bears wide receiver, more than 63.5 receiving yards. Now, he hasn't hit this in a while, right? Because he's been playing with Tyson Bagent. But I will say he's had at least 50 receiving yards in 4 of the 5 games played with Tyson Bagent. So it's not like he's been super far away from the 64 he needs. But he had 100 plus yards in 3 of his last 4 games played with Fields. I think with Fields back, he's going to feed DJ Moore. And again, like he's been getting 54, 55, 58 yards. I do think Fields is going to get him that extra 10 yards he needs to get to at least 64 receiving yards in this game against the Lions. It's a nice matchup for him. And then last up, Dalton Kincaid. They just keeping him at right around this area. So he's at 50.5 receiving yards that he needs, and he's done that every single week without Dawson Knox there. Now last week it was 51, but hey, that's still more than 50.5. And the Jets are so good at covering wide receivers. I mean, their whole secondary is just so good, right? But I do think they're going to have to utilize Dalton Kincaid to get this ball moving. They're going to have lockdown coverage on both Davis and Diggs. Diggs will still get his, but Dalton Kincaid will be the easiest way to get the ball, down the field for Josh Allen in this game.
Yeah, that was so brutal because in a lot of places with Dalton Kincaid last week, it was 51.5 was the number. Yeah. And I was like, can they get out a ruler and see if he got 0.6?
Well, what's wild is when we were doing this episode last week, I said Kincaid and he was at like 46.5. So it really went up from Friday to Sunday. So make sure you get, you go onto the PrizePicks app and do those today before these numbers start to increase.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's hard. I mean, but I said, wait, he ran through the end zone. That should be an extra yard or 2. So they don't give us that, unfortunately. Now, I have 3 wide receivers, and these guys have been on, and one you'll hear a name that we've been buzzing about all week. Brandon Aiyuk, I had really high in the rankings. This matchup is just exceptional, whether he gets Jamel Dean or Carlton Davis. Particularly good for him on the outside. 6.5 receiving yards is the number. I'm going more with Brandon Aiyuk. And by the way, we go more because, again, we're fantasy people. We want to be there and invest in the more. But Brandon, it's not fun to watch somebody, are they going to not get this? Yeah. It's not as fun. But Brandon Aiyuk, definitely 66.5. I like that number. I'm going to go with more. Now, the guy we've been talking up is Jayden Reed. And look, let's hope this comes through because that means he's going to have a good day for fantasy. 34.5 is the total here for his receiving yards. 34.5. I mean, that's really low for a player of that caliber and such a great matchup. I think it's just maybe people are looking at Christian Watson and Romeo Doubs a little bit more. There's a little bit more buzz about those guys. But 34.5, you're going to hit that. We've told you many reasons why. And Christian Kirk, I mean, he's the man. Every time he's the guy who gets open. And it seems like he has a great slot matchup every week. They just let him do his thing. And look, it's pretty good. And he can also get it done on the outside this week against the Titans. It's a very good matchup. So love that as well. They're really bad in the slot. They're really bad outside. Doesn't matter where Christian Kirk is going to be. But at 58.5, you got to go with more on the receiving yard. So those are mine, 3 receivers. So 3 receivers that if I had these 3 in my lineup this week in seasonal, I'd be really excited about.
Yeah, totally agree with you with Brandon Ayuk, more than 66.5. I do a 49ers podcast every week, and I will be advising that one as well over there for Brandon Ayuk. I think this is just a smash spot for him against the Buccaneers. And you already know my love for Jayden Reed. He definitely should have, I think he has at least 60, 80 receiving yards, and he only needs 35. So really love that.
Yeah, so those are our picks. And again, go there and, as Michelle said, get the numbers while they're there and go for the numbers you feel comfortable, especially when you go for the more. If you're going for less, if you want to play that way, you may want the numbers to go a little higher. So that's how it goes when we're looking at PrizePicks here. But thanks again for joining us here with our week leading up to week 11, giving the analysis you need to dominate your seasonal leagues and your DFS environments there. We really appreciate you joining us each and every week, and it's Thanksgiving, so really thankful that you guys check us out every week. For Locked On Fantasy Football, this has been Vinnie Iyer.
And I'm Michelle Magdziuk. Bye, y'all.